I'm going to start off by showing the video that we will be discussing later in the morning. And what we'll do after that is go through how the brain simulator relates to what's in this video, because that's a really key question that I keep getting is, well, you're working on this stuff with the graph and the UKS, and how does that relate to overall how you think the brain works? And so what we're going to do is start with the video that will do overall how your brain works in 5 minutes, and then we will come back to how the UKS and the brain simulator work, and then we'll relate the two and talk about what are the implications. And so let's start by showing this video, and to get just as a warning, it's short, it's only 7 minutes, so we won't spend a lot of time on it. This video summarizes what we know and what we can surmise about how your brain works in just 5 minutes. This is information you need in order to understand why today's AI is not like your brain, but why future artificial intelligence will be. I'm Charles Simon, longtime AI researcher, software developer, and manager. In addition to AI work, I've developed software for several neurological test instruments and neural simulators, and along the way learned a lot about the capabilities and limitations of biological neurons and how your brain must work to do the things it does. So how does your brain work? Let's get started. The human brain is an amazing system capable of doing many things, even understanding how the brain works. Think of your brain as a black box with inputs and outputs. Inputs consisting of signals from your eyes, ears, and other senses, and outputs being motor nerves which control your body. But what goes on inside the black box? To start with, your brainstem takes care of all of the housekeeping, and your cerebellum remembers sequences of physical actions which allow your body to take coordinated actions, while your neocortex does the thinking. Incoming neural signals from your senses go to custom circuitry, which can do boundary and motion detection on signals from your eyes, harmonic processing on signals from your ears, and handle and prioritize the flood of information coming in from all your senses all the time. The primitives recognized by these brain areas are passed to pattern recognition areas, which remember libraries of recognizable sounds, sights, and feelings, which can be combined into even more complex patterns. Sequences of sounds are learned as words, and collections of image primitives are learned as objects. Combinations of words and objects begin the basis of knowledge. Your brain is very good at finding closest matches to input patterns. You can understand people who mispronounce or misspell words. You can recognize an object, even if you can see just a part. Individual neurons are good at this too. The more a pattern of inputs matches a pattern of synaptic weights, the more likely the neuron is to fire. When it fires, the neuron sends a neurotransmitter pulse to other neurons via even more synapses. Clusters of neurons form a graph of things connected by relationships so they can represent objects and their attributes. Things can also inherit attributes, so if you know that Fido is a dog, your brain only needs to remember the attributes which make Fido unique. All the other attributes are inherited from the dog thing. A remarkable form of data compression. With 16 billion neurons in your neocortex, you can know many millions of things, each of which might have thousands of relationship-connected attributes, which are also things. With this sort of memory, when you see an object, which causes its related neuron cluster to fire, you can also recall its attributes, and when an attribute thing fires, you can recall other things which have that attribute. After recognition, the incoming sensory information is assembled in an internal reality model where your brain does its best to make sense of what it sees and hears to build a facsimile of your surroundings, estimating distances to objects you see. You use this model to learn your way around your environment and know where various things are relative to yourself. You can close your eyes and remember where things are. Your brain can also present related or random information from your knowledge base, and you can imagine things. You can remember groups of objects which represent a scene or a situation. As you continue to learn, your brain stores sequences of experiences and their related outcomes. You can combine these with your closest match ability to note that some situations are similar to others and use this information to plan for the future by imagining possible futures in your reality model and choosing the best course of action. These sequences could relate to anything. In addition to finding your way home, sequences could relate to chess, mathematics, cooking, or dancing, even interpersonal relationships. You can learn and improve these skills by remembering more and more detailed experiences. Imagination and planning both use information from your knowledge store and present information to your reality model. You must continuously decide on the relative quality of the actions you plan to take, so you need a set of feelings, goals, or emotions which you strive to improve. These permeate most of your brain's functions. So overall, your brain is coping with a flood of incoming sensory information, doing its best to make sense of this information and model it into your concept of reality. It matches this information with stored memories to analyze the present situation, consider future possibilities, and take the course of action which will maximize your well-being. This video has described a model of brain function which encompasses most explainable human abilities. These functions are all necessary to intelligence and our consciousness. As we learn more about the brain, we'll discover more details and add them to this model. I've just scratched the surface in this video. Many of these capabilities are already implemented in our project, the BrainSimIII 3. If you're a software developer, you can download the project from GitHub at the link in the description. And you can also join the Future AI Society to learn more and participate in our monthly online meetings and enhance the development of the software which forms the basis for the future of artificial intelligence. If you found this information interesting, be sure. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next phases, but before we do, I wanted to ask if there are any questions. You can just shout out if you have one. I have a number of topics that I wanted to address that are directly related, and I wanted to just quickly show this slide. Just to ask a couple of questions of interest, and I want to make sure that as we go through this morning that we address these. And the key is how do the mental model and the decision processes in your mind relate to what the UKS does? And the UKS, and quite rightly, many people recognize is a data structure or a database, and it has certain capabilities. And the question is, how do these relate? Another question is, how complex is the code needed to implement all of the functions of the brain that I point out? And one of the things that is interesting that's generally ignored is that the content of your brain is much larger than the content of your DNA. And your content of your DNA structures the structure of your brain, and therefore your brain has to be based on a bunch of much simpler rules that repeat. And so as I write a lot of code, and as an example, to give you an idea, your DNA is approximately 750 megabytes. And how much of that is devoted to your brain is, we don't know. Perhaps only 10%, perhaps only 1%. We know that we and chimpanzees differ in our DNA by only 1%. So the amount that's defining your brain is pretty small. And so if we're limited to saying that we can define this structure in, say, 75 megabytes of data, this precludes the possibility of defining every interconnection and all of the content to get started. It requires that there has to be a set of rules, and then the brain builds itself. One of the things that we'll be talking about in this related to the video is, have I defined the pieces of your brain that you need to be a conscious entity? And we'll talk about that, and then talk about if we made all of these same capabilities in a robot, would it be conscious? But suppose you built, instead of building a robot, you built an entity that can move about in a simulated environment. Could it also be a conscious entity? I think that's a fascinating question. And oh, by the way, just in this morning's news feed, I saw that the brain of a fruit fly has been entirely mapped. And the brain of a fruit fly is about 130,000 neurons. And as we map it, if we can look at the behavior of a fruit fly and figure out how this relates to the structure of the brain, that's another step on the way to being able to do the same thing with humans, the same way we came down the Human Genome Project, which once it got started, progressed vastly more quickly than anybody had predicted as more and more people joined on. So, any questions before we jump on to the UKS?
Yes, I do.
Yes, go ahead.
One question I have is, if we were to make a simulator, it'd be very complicated. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So maybe we could use robots instead to get the embodied knowledge it needs.
That is an excellent question, that as you build a simulator of a reality, now, perhaps you could build a simulator that was only two-dimensional and build a two-dimensional simulated entity in there, and that two-dimensional simulated entity could do the planning and forethought and become self-aware, all within a very simple simulation. But you're entirely correct that you reach a point in trying to build a simulation of the real world that vastly becomes much more difficult to build a simulation than it is to build a robot.
Right.
A real advantage of the simulation is that it's completely repeatable. But it is, and it is definitely, you reach a point of diminishing return with a simulation if you try to go to reality. But maybe you don't need to go to reality to get true thinking going on.
Right.
Okay, what we're going to do next, for everyone's benefit, is a very, very quick overview of what the UKS does. And the UKS is short for Universal Knowledge Store, and that is part of the brain simulator. And now you should see a brain simulator screen. And be sure to stop me and ask a question if I go over if I skip over some important parts, so that we be able to back up and move and correct things as we go. In this window is the content of the UKS, and the UKS can be thought of as a knowledge graph. As we move forward, you'll see there's a lot more to it than just a knowledge graph, but fundamentally it's a knowledge graph. And this is a map of the content of the knowledge graph, and the way it is displayed is hierarchical. The data itself doesn't have to be hierarchical, but it's a whole lot easier to visualize that way. And in the UKS, there are nodes connected by edges, and the nodes we call things, and the edges we call relationships. And I do that to differentiate, because nodes are kind of generic. And when I say thing, I'm talking about a specific software entity that has a specific set of capabilities, where the relationship also is what could be a connection in a graph. It has a specific set of software capabilities. So these are nodes, and what we are seeing are things, and these are the labels of those things. And there is a thing called thing, and there is a thing called action and a thing called object. We can right-click and see a bunch of content associated with that we'll talk about later if there's time. But if I wanted, also the brain simulator supports agents, and the agents can interact with the world or interact with the UKS or both. And these 3 dialog boxes are also from agents that are exceedingly simple. This one is a dialog box that allows you to enter data into the UKS from the keyboard, and this is one that allows you to query the content of the UKS, also from the keyboard. So if I say my favorite starting point is Fido is a dog, we have an entry that is created in the UKS, and there's an entry called dog, which is an unknown object because we have no idea what a dog is. And Fido is indented under dog because Fido is a dog. And if I were to say, for instance, Rover is a dog, oops, Rover is a dog, now Rover is also a dog. Things turn green in the UKS as they change, and that's just to draw your attention to them. And as I put my mouse inside the UKS, it turns blue to indicate that it's no longer being updated. All of this information is real time and is being taken care of in a lot of different ways simultaneously. So the so because it's real time, like your brain, you can update various parts of it and they can all interact. With this system, you can have a relationship between any 2 things. And relationships essentially are just pointers, and the system keeps track of them. One of the things we can also do is to say dogs have fur. And now we have under dog, we have relationships, and we have dogs have fur. Everything is translated into the singular because it's more consistent that way. But that is a feature of the input dialog box, not a feature of the UKS. If you wanted to build the UKS so it stored plurals and singulars, you could do that too. Keep in mind that these are all just labels on things. So I could right-click and change the label on this to Fred, and now its label is changed. And one of the things that William has been working on is the relationship between language and these nodes. These things are unambiguous. So the word dog has many meanings. And so the word dog is going to be a separate thing in a separate area of the UKS, and it will relate to this abstract idea of a dog which has 4 legs and fur. We can query this database, but before I do that, I'm going to move on. I want to first ask if there are any questions, and I want to welcome Zaid. Welcome to the chat. Enjoy, and we're glad you're here. Any questions?
I do have a question, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So how can the system handle fictional information, like Harry Potter is a wizard, for example?
That is an excellent question. And
because ChatGPT messes up that a lot, you know what I mean?
Yes. That's an excellent question that there are 2 ways to handle it. And one of the ways is that the data structure, as I say, is I've presented as a tree, as I can say, a wizard is a fictional. And then I can say Harry Potter is a person. And I can say Harry is a wizard. And we've jumped ahead a couple of steps, but Harry now will inherit capabilities. He inherits the properties of being fictional as well as inheriting the properties of being a person.
Right.
Now, at this point, it's up to us to know that fictional means that it is marginally true.
Mm.
The system understands the concept of information which isn't currently true, and I think I have a demonstration of that already prepared, which would save me a little trouble getting it off the ground. No, I don't think I do. But I can say Fido is a dog. I can say that Fido can play fetch if weather is sunny. And this is represented as a relationship of Fido and fetch and all of these other things. But when you analyze what if this is true, Fido can play fetch is neither true nor false, because it relies on the concept of whether or not the second clause, weather is sunny, which is also neither true nor false until we give it some additional information. Now,
Right.
Down here, we have said weather is funny. So if we were to look at the properties of Fido, yes, we can see that Fido can play fetch. But if we were to say the weather is not sunny, now Fido can no longer play fetch. So it's no longer an attribute of Fido, although this relationship, we still know it's there. So we could query about the capability here and learn that if the weather was sunny, then Fido could play fetch, which is kind of cool. So with conditionals, the system is capable of supporting information which is neither true nor false at any given moment. But everything resolves to being correct, or nearly so, as your mind or the UKS continues. And now I'm going to go to this next series here, and that was an excellent question. I appreciate your asking it. Here we have a system which is pre-built with a little bit of information, where we have mammals, and among cat is a mammal, and dog is a mammal, and Fluffy and Mittens are cats, and Bowser and Fido and Rover and Spot are dogs. And you can see that Fido has a collar. And so we can search by attributes and say, what has a collar, and do a search, and we'll find out that only Fido does. But if we could say that Fluffy also has a collar, this one doesn't this one you have to push the button to refresh. So you find that both Fluffy and Fido have collars. And one of the key features of the way the system works is that these searches are exceedingly quick, because only search on the specific items, the specific attributes you've requested. And as we move forward a little later in the morning, if we have time, I'll show you that exactly the same search process can be used to say, what is this image most closely resembling? But before we get there, I want to give you a more overall picture, and I've got some prototype software that I haven't pulled out of mothballs in quite a while, but I want to show it to you. And this is a model of, here again, we have the UKS, but within the UKS, we have a lot of the things that were mentioned in the video. We have a mental model, we have an imagination, we have attention, which is not discussed in the video, and we have a bunch of, not shown here, but the system is also capable of handling situation, action, result triples. And so if we run this, I'll just quickly talk about what these agents are. This is the voice in agent. This is where you can give it commands or it listens. This is the voice out agent. This is an agent that does language parsing. This is the model. We talked about the capabilities of building a model. This is a model built in an open source system. And so it handles simple geometric shapes. And so here we have the robot itself that can move about through the model. This is what it sees in its field of view. So you can see directly in front of the system, directly in front of the robot, which we call Sally, can only see this sphere. This is the visual system. This is Sally's internal mental model. And we can look in this UKS under the mental model and see that it sees this object, but it knows essentially nothing about it. So it gives it all these arbitrary labels. So it's a PO0, that's a physical object 0. It has a color and a size and a shape. I believe I can say this is a basketball. Now it's still a P0, but now a P0 has the property of being a basketball. Oops, other way. There we go. A P0 is a basketball. So in addition to the attributes that it sees, the system can automatically infer that it inherits all of the properties of being a basketball, if there were any. So I could say, I would know immediately that this is made of leather. As in watching the physical model, if I turn left, you can see that now I'm looking at the yellow sphere, and here it is in the field of view, and here it is in the visual representation, and here it is in the mental model. And one of the things that's important is if we take a top view of the mental model, you can see, well, you could see if it was on the screen. Way out here is the tennis ball, is the yellow sphere. Even though it's outside the field of view, this is the basketball. So the basketball is still known about, even though we're not currently looking at it. And we could say that's a tennis ball, and now it's known as a tennis ball. And you can see as we turn back to where we were before, now we can tell by what's highlighted that it recognizes that it's looking at a basketball. And so we've shown learning directly by explanation. This is completely different from anything that happens in a neural network. This is, you are told this is a ball or this is a basketball, and you say, okay, I believe you, this is a basketball, and you add that information to your mind, so you can subsequently recognize it later. It recognizes it by the color, shape, and size. If I say a basketball is a ball and a tennis ball is a ball, now under ball, we can see that there is a basketball and tennis ball, and you can see the entire UKS in the mind has reorganized itself properly so that a basketball and a tennis ball are both children, and they're all still recognized, and everything all still works the way you expect. And this is a demonstration of how you can learn things kind of after the fact. You don't have to have your information presented in any particular order. You can get any information in any order, and this data structure kind of sorts it out. If we turn left even further, we'll be looking at the cube, and there's the cube. And we could say this is a cube, and it would recognize that as well in the future. Now let's just do that for fun. Now it's a cube. And so as we turn, we'll see the tennis ball. And if we turn right again, we'll see the basketball. And if we turn right again, we'll be looking at this green sphere. And although it is not known what this green sphere is, it's a P03, it knows that a P03 is a ball. And it knows that the P03 is a ball because it has inferred because the other two balls, basketball and tennis ball, all share a shape, even though they're different in size and color, but they share a shape. It will presume and infer that anything that it sees that has that shape is a ball. And so what we've done here is tie together the object tree by which it knows what things are based on their attributes, and the mental model where it knows about things that it sees and things that it presents, things that it are presented to it in its visual input. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah, what's up?
So these thought systems, they're all practically born yesterday, right? That's why they have almost no information until you give it to them. And that's the main problem with with these systems, is that you need common sense knowledge to acquire common sense knowledge. It's a catch-22, right?
Yes. It would be my contention that you have innate capabilities of doing the things that you see here, and that if you collect enough data with the things you see here, you will learn common sense. That is, currently there's no capability of doing this in this software, but if you could see that a basketball bounces and a tennis ball bounces, you would infer what bouncing was. And so you would have the common sense of knowing that balls roll and balls bounce, and some balls don't bounce, and bowling balls don't bounce very well. But most balls roll, although you can find some balls that don't roll very well either. But this is the sort of common sense that I expect will appear from more data in this data structure with the inference that I've already shown.
Right, because I think like ChatGPT, it knows everything on the internet, but it, doesn't have the understanding of what it is.
Exactly, and the things that give you understanding are the fact that when you hear the word ball, that triggers a single thing in your mind, but that thing relates to many balls of different types that you know about and many balls that you have seen in the past, and what are their characteristics and capabilities, and what are their common characteristics. So as I showed in the video, where when you see a yellow object, you can immediately think of scads of other yellow objects.
Right.
In this case, as you are going through the world, everything you see triggers thoughts about other related things. And that's a continuous process. And doing it requires that you have the mental model, and it requires that you have the information about things in a sort of hierarchical way where you can search based on attributes. So if you know if it has four square corners, it's a square probably, or it could be a rectangle. But if it's obscured and you only see 3 of the square corners, you can think, well, it's most likely a square because most of the time when I've seen 3 corners, it's turned out to be a square with a hidden corner.
Right.
And let me see. Yes, so we're talking about a mental model. In the mental model, the way this is written, well, the way it will be written is that there will be specific locations in the mental model, and the way your brain works is with something called a grid cell that keeps track of your position. And from that, I infer that when you see something, you make a relationship from a specific location in the mental model, from a specific grid cell to that thing. And an important characteristic of the mental model is as you move, everything changes its relative position. And this, by the way, the software that I demonstrated actually does that. So as you move toward an object, you know it gets closer. As you move away, it gets further away. If you turn and go sideways from it, you know that it goes from being beside you to being behind you. And this is, I mean, all of this has been implemented in the model that I just showed. So that is a necessity that your mental model has. And one can easily look at the evolutionary advantage of having a mental model. As an example, if a rabbit gets chased by a coyote, you know that it may initially see the coyote, but as it turns and runs away, it knows that coyote is still there, and it better keep on running. So having a mental model where you can know that the coyote is there is really important. I want to add to that the capability that I showed in the video of imagining. And I put that in this in the software that I showed you, where if you have a mental model, you bring in objects from your physical surroundings. And if you hear a bird tweeting up there, you may not see it, but you can say, aha, there's a bird up there, I'll add it to my mental model. If I reach into somewhere I can't see and I touch something, I can kind of figure out what it is by touch and add that to the mental model. So the mental model integrates all of your senses to build a map of your surroundings. And you are always at the center of your mental model because you know where things are relative to yourself. You see things in angles relative to your current position, and you hear things with angles relative to your current position. And so you're building this mental model, and you can imagine things by adding things to the mental model from your memory. And you have a system that keeps track of this thing is from your vision and it's probably real, and this thing is from your memory, so it's probably imagined. But we can also see that in some people, this capability has failed. So they are unable to distinguish things that they see from things they imagine. And so the mental model has this important capability, but it also has the shortcoming in the event it fails. But the ability to imagine is so important because as you imagine one thing, rather than just knowing what happens, as I showed in the video, when you think of something, you can imagine what the result is going to be rather than actually taking the action and being struck with the result, because sometimes results are painful or fatal. So it's so much cheaper and faster to be able to imagine the result without actually taking the action. So much better. And in the memory of what results are, some results can be other situations. That means that you can imagine, from your current situation, you can imagine taking an action, imagine what the result is going to be, and then imagine another action from that result and taking to receive yet another result. And by doing this, you can plan. And this is something that is entirely necessary to a human and entirely absent in ChatGPT. So if you want to be able to write an algorithm, you have to be able to plan. And being able to make the planning part of this system work is going to be so key to making it be intelligent. And from my perspective, one of the things that it allows me to do is to say that if an entity is incapable of planning, it probably doesn't have a mental model, and it probably cannot be a conscious entity or have any self-awareness or anything that we would call thinking or intelligence. And ChatGPT makes a good showing, and it certainly appears to be intelligent. But because, based on what they tell me about how it's built and how it works, because it has no internal mental model, it cannot plan and it cannot actually be thinking. It's only pretending to be thinking, and it does a remarkable job of pretense. Right, and yes. I don't want to run down ChatGPT. I use it all the time. You want to be able to write a program, first ask, has somebody else written this program before? And I can cut and paste it. And you ask ChatGPT. And the good news is that in programming, with a couple of keystrokes, you can find out if what ChatGPT is recommending is useful or garbage. In many other situations, it's much more difficult to tell. You ask it a history question, it's hard to tell if it made that up or not. But in software development specifically, it's an excellent tool. Okay, any other questions? Alec and Zaid?
Well, one that I have been thinking about, but it might be slightly tangential, I guess, is whether or not it would be possible for these kind of systems to directly learn the structure or the data structure from unstructured data sets, like from text or something like that.
Excellent question. William, you want to answer that?
Sure, yeah. We are trying to actually use ChatGPT to look at the unstructured data and try to understand it, because it has a lot of capabilities to know a lot. You know, it read the entire internet, so we're trying to use that.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, building the data in a structured way is one of the keys to being able to think, because you've got to be able to know. And I didn't mention this, but I did mention it in the video. Is if you know about 100 yellow objects, and they have a relationship to a single yellow thing, to say that's the attribute, that is a tremendous mechanism for data compression. So when you think about this, if you have a system that supports inheritance with exceptions, and this data structure does that, you only need, so you know that Fido is a dog and Fido has fur and Fido has a tail, and if you have a dog that doesn't have a tail, you can add that as an exception. So if Stubby doesn't have a tail, you simply say Stubby has no tail, and it adds that as an exception, and everything takes care of itself. And as you think through how this works, the entire data structure is only remembering the exceptions. It almost never remembers any actual facts because it inherits so much. And everything you think about is always inheriting more and more information rather than ever having any concrete thought. And then you're thinking about everything in terms of its exceptions. And this reduces the amount of data that you need to store. And this is really important because the data storage capabilities of the mind, of the human brain, are much less than what is clear that you know. Obviously, you cannot memorize Wikipedia, but you can put Wikipedia on a memory stick. This is the memory that's available to your brain is much lower than the memory on a memory stick, but you can, by properly structuring the data, get a tremendous quantity of valuable, useful information stuffed into a very small, relatively small memory structure. And understanding that I'm talking about billions of potential memories, but relatively small, not like the 130,000 of the fruit fly, but many more, many fewer. Okay, any other questions? Well, what I think we'll do is we'll defer the progress on the next feature, the vision system, until a later date. And I'll have more to show on it. I'll give you just a quick preview of its current state, but we won't go into it in any depth. Let me get it started over in this window. I'll be back in just a moment. Too many windows open. And now we have to share the screen. And then we'll just give you a quick view of this, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, you have a screen that is a little bit different. This is a vision module, and currently it can see content from, let's say, single shapes. Let's start with single shapes. Here we have a square. And within this module, you can choose what you're going to see. So this is the actual bitmap of the image. This is the boundaries that have been detected. These are segments that it's found, and these are the corners that it's found. And based on the corners that it's found, in this agent, it checks to see what shape is this most like based on the shapes that it knows about. And in here is the mental model where it displays this shape. And the way the search is done, it's entirely size independent. So it knows, and it's scale, rotation, and position independent. It only knows what the corners are and the relative distances above them, between them. Over in the UKS, I've focused in on the stored shapes, and you can see what the data is. And if I open, for example, another file, an image of a rectangle, it's going to say that's a square because squares is all it knows about. And it has no alternative but to say, if you only know about one feature, everything is a square. And in the mental model, all it knows is a square. So what we want to do is to say, when it recognizes a square, we'll say, no, that's not a square. And we'll come over here and say, this is a rectangle. Oops. And you can see that this code is not nearly as user-friendly as some of the other code, but we can recognize this as a rectangle. We still recognize this as a square. We can still recognize a rectangle on end, or a rectangle on an angle. And if we give it a slightly more complex image, it now says, aha, there is a rectangle, two squares, and another rectangle. And so it can do this kind of recognition very, very effectively. And what we're moving on towards is the MNIST database. And I wanted to show you quickly what the data in the MNIST database looks like. Here's a 1 in the MNIST database, and another 1. And one of the things that the way this recognition works is it works by, instead of by outlines, it works by strokes. And so one of the things that I recognize is the way MNIST works is it assumes you train on handwritten digits, and in my humble opinion, that's dumb. Let's train on good exemplars. And so here's what a 1 looks like. Let me show you the data. There we go. There's a 1, and it has is now being able to, I'll make this bigger so you can see what it's about. It is a single vertical stroke and a single slightly curved stroke. And if we look at a 4, it's a couple, and you can see these better if I turn off the bitmap itself. It's 4 strokes. And if we get to a 2, it's a number of curved strokes and 2 straight strokes. And so, although not yet implemented, I'm going to say that this collection of strokes is what's the essence of a 2. And so, using exactly the same search mechanism, it should be able to recognize how close something is relative to being a 2, it being the exemplar of a 2, determine if it can figure out what it is, and if it gets it wrong, use a learning process to add more exemplars and figure out where it's between 2 exemplars, etc. So that's what I hope to be able to show next time when we have a little more time to focus in on that. Any final questions?
Yeah, how will it know what the exemplar examples are?
Well, when I was gonna say, as a child, the way the MNIST database is set up is you have, if I remember the numbers right, 17,000 exemplars of the numbers, and then you have, say, 5,000 test cases. And so you train on this immense data set, and you test on a much smaller data set. My contention is, when you as a child were learning what the digits were, you had a teacher that drew on the board the most perfect examples they possibly could. And from that, you can say, well, a 1 has to be a single straight stroke. And so if you test and it's an almost straight stroke, then it's different. So my intent is to give the system the exemplars first, give it 10 digits, and then give it some test digits and see how well it does. Right. And it will do things, undoubtedly, it will do things like when it encounters a 7 that has a cross on it, well, that might be more like a 1 or more like a 4 or more like something. I expect it will get things wrong. And then it will have to add another test case. But it only needs to add a test case if it gets the answer wrong, which I think is an entirely different approach to machine learning than we've seen in the typical machine learning ideas. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that works, and I hope to have it working here in the next number of weeks.
Right. For example, if you want to train a knowledge graph, not a knowledge graph, a large language model, you probably want to train on Wikipedia first, then all the weird sites on the internet,
I think that would be a wise idea, but I'm not sure whether or not it's done that way. Right. If you want your system to have true information, it's much easier if you give it the true information first.
Right.
It is, and we know from human activity, from humans, it's very difficult to unlearn stuff once you find out that it's wrong.
Right.
Okay, well, I would like to thank you all for joining. I sure appreciate your time and attention, and tell your friends, and we'll put this up. I'll do a little editing and put it up on a YouTube video here in the next coming days. And you can tell your friends, and they can watch it, and people that have missed it. And I look forward to seeing you next time in about a month, and we'll talk about vision. Thank you so much. Bye.